Wyoming Territory, late spring of 1877. The wind carried dust across the empty street as the stagecoach wheels came to a grinding halt in a place no signpost named. The door creaked open, and out stepped a woman in a faded blue traveling dress, her boots coated in trail dust, a satchel clutched tight in her hand. Her name was Blythe Sutton, 22, stubborn as stone and twice as lost. She stepped down and looked around. The driver tipped his hat. "This here's the last stop, miss." Blythe furrowed her brow. "This is not Cheyenne." "No, ma'am, last rockslide back east rerouted us, this is." The man glanced around, then shrugged. "No one rightly named it." The coach pulled away, leaving her in front of a half-leaning saloon and a shuttered general store. A dog barked in the distance. Two men on the porch of the saloon stopped their card game to stare. Blythe's plan had been simple: go to Cheyenne, take the schoolteacher position, start over. What she had not planned for was ending up in a town without a name, no board to welcome her, no train to carry her back. She turned slowly, unsure where to go first, when a voice behind her said, "You lost." Blythe spun around. The man stood just off the street, reins in one gloved hand, his horse standing still beside him. He looked to be in his late 20s, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, with a quiet steadiness in his eyes. "I was supposed to reach Cheyenne," she said, lifting her chin a little. "Well," he said, stepping closer with a slight smile, "you missed it by about 2 days' ride the wrong direction." Her shoulders slumped. "Wonderful," he studied her a moment. "Name's Prescott King. Folks call me Press, only live a mile out. Got a spare room in my barn if you need a place to stay tonight. Safer than here." She hesitated. "I do not know you." "That's fair. But you are standing in a town too small for trouble to be far, and you look like you could use a warm meal." Her stomach growled before she could stop it. She sighed. "Blythe Sutton." He nodded once. "Well, Miss Sutton, you coming?" She followed. His ranch sat low against the hills, nothing fancy but solidly built. A weathered porch, smoke rising from the chimney, a chicken coop tucked behind the barn. As they rode in, a girl no older than 7 darted from the house. A boy, maybe 5, followed. "Daddy." Prescott dismounted and knelt as the girl ran into his arms. "Hey, Kira, hey, Kent." Blythe stepped back, unsure. Prescott glanced over. Their mother left 3 years ago. "Took her things and nothing else." Blythe's chest tightened. "I am sorry," he nodded. "So am I, but they are mine, and that's enough." Kira looked up at Blythe with wide eyes. "Who is she?" Prescott smiled gently. "A friend." Dinner was quiet but warm. Blythe ate slowly, listening to the children chatter. Afterward, Prescott showed her the barn loft where a cot and blanket waited. "I will head out first thing in the morning," she said. "You do not have to," he replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Stage only runs through twice a month. Next one is not due for another 9 days. You are welcome to stay until then." "I do not want to impose." His voice softened. "It is not an imposition if you are needed. And right now, they could use a little softness around here." She looked back toward the house, where Kira's laughter echoed through the shutters. She exhaled slowly. "All right. Just a few days." The next morning, she helped with breakfast, brushing Kira's hair and tying it back with a ribbon from her bag. Kent followed her all day, asking questions. Prescott watched from the fence line. Hammer paused mid-swing as she bent to tie the boy's boot. That night, after the children were asleep, Blythe stepped out onto the porch. Prescott leaned against the rail, arms crossed. "You are good with them," he said. "I was the oldest of 5, left home to send money back. Took up teaching." He nodded. "They like you." A pause settled between them. The wind stirred the grass. Blythe turned to him. "You really live out here all alone?" "Not alone," he said quietly. "Just not with the one I thought I would." She looked at him for a long moment, then said, "You call it lonely?" He shook his head. "Not anymore." Something shifted in her chest. Days passed. Blythe stayed. She helped with chores, read to the children, mended Kent's ripped sleeve when he fell chasing a grasshopper. She saw the way Prescott looked at her when he thought she was not watching, quiet, steady, like she was something he had not expected but could not turn from. One afternoon, a rider came hard down the trail. He was dusted in red clay, his horse lathered with sweat. "Press," he called, swinging off. That old mine west of here collapsed, 2 men still inside. Prescott did not hesitate. He turned to Blythe. "Stay here with the kids." "No," she said, grabbing the rifle from the porch. "You will need help." He stared at her, then nodded once. "All right, let's move." The mine was half buried under rock and timber. Men shouted, digging with bare hands. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Together, Prescott and Blythe crawled through a narrow shaft, bracing beams with their shoulders. They found the 2 miners barely conscious, pinned beneath a broken cart. With effort, they pulled them free, dragging them back toward the light. Outside, someone clapped Blythe on the back. "You saved them." She looked at Prescott, his face smeared with grit, eyes on her like she had just changed something in him. That evening, Blythe sat on the porch steps while Kira braided flowers into her hair. Prescott stood behind her, hands in his pockets. "I thought you were just passing through," he said. "I thought so too," she said softly. He knelt beside her. "But you stayed," she nodded. "Because someone called me love." Prescott's brow furrowed. "I did not, you did," she said, turning toward him, when Kent scraped his knee. "You told him, go inside, love will take care of it, you meant me." Prescott's breath caught. "It just felt right." Blythe looked at him, heart thudding. It was. And then his hand found hers, fingers rough and warm, and she leaned into him like she had belonged there all along. By the time the first June thunderhead rolled low over the hills, Blythe had been on the ranch for 6 days. She knew, because Kira had been faithfully scratching marks into the porch rail with a small nail she'd found in the woodpile. Each evening, the girl would show her tally, grinning like it was treasure. That morning, Blythe was out behind the chicken coop, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her hem damp from dew. She was teaching Kent how to hold a bucket steady without tipping it, his earnest little face set in concentration. The boy's hands were small but determined, and she let him take his time. The sound of boots on gravel caught her ear, and she turned to find Prescott approaching from the side gate, his coat slung over one shoulder. His eyes weren't on her, but on the boy. He waited until Kent was done before speaking. "I need to ride out to the east fence. A few of the cows broke the line last night." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Do you need another set of hands?" He shook his head once. "No, but I could use someone watching over things here, Mrs. Larrabee down the trail offered to come by, but the children might prefer you." Blythe glanced toward the house. The windows were open to the breeze, lace curtains fluttering. "They'll stay calmer if I'm here," he nodded. "I'll be back before supper if the weather holds." As he turned to go, she hesitated, then said, "You always fix things yourself." He paused, halfway through tightening his saddle cinch. "If I can." She tilted her head, thoughtful. "And if you can't," he met her eyes. "Then I learn how." No more words passed between them, but something unspoken settled in the silence. He rode out just as the first gust of wind tugged at the grass. By mid-afternoon, the sky had darkened to a hard slate. Thunder rumbled across the high plains, and Blythe moved the children inside, setting them up at the kitchen table with a pair of wooden blocks and a tin of buttons. She lit the lamps before the rain came, slow at first, then hard. The storm cracked open just past dusk. Rain battered the roof in sheets, and the wind howled against the shutters. Blythe moved from window to window, checking every latch twice. Kira stayed close, quiet for once, while Kent curled beneath the kitchen bench with a blanket pulled up to his chin. When Blythe opened the front door just a sliver, she saw no sign of Prescott's return. Mud streaked the yard, and the wind drove needles of rain across the porch. She shut the door tight and bolted it. Hours passed. She kept the children close, her voice low and steady as she read from an old dog-eared book she'd found in the corner shelf. Kira fell asleep clutching Blythe's sleeve. Kent followed not long after, thumb in his mouth, curled at her side. It was near midnight when the latch clicked. She rose fast, heart thudding, until she saw Prescott framed in the doorway, soaked through and limping slightly. One sleeve was torn and his hat hung limp in his hand. "I'm fine," he said before she could ask. Had to walk the last mile. Lost the horse crossing the creek. She helped him inside without a word, fetched the basin and poured warm water. His hands were scraped and one knuckle was split. She cleaned them gently, her touch quiet and sure. When she began to reach for a dry shirt from the peg near the door, he caught her wrist not hard, just enough to still her. I didn't think you'd stay this long. She looked at him, rain still dripping from his hair. Neither did I. I kept imagining the house empty again. No voices. No footsteps overhead. I'm not gone yet. He released her wrist. Do you want to be? She hesitated. I came west to find something that made sense. I thought it'd be a classroom, a place with rules and order, but he waited. She met his eyes. But nothing's made more sense than this porch, these children. Your hand on mine when I'm steadying a beam. The way you say my name like it's always been here. He didn't speak, just reached up, fingers brushing a damp strand of hair away from her cheek. Lightning split the sky outside, but inside, everything held still. I don't ask much, he said finally, but if you wanted to stay, I'd make room, more than just a cot in the barn. She didn't answer aloud. Only stepped forward and rested her head lightly against his chest, her arms wrapping around him as if they'd belonged there from the start. His hand found the small of her back, and he held her like he meant to keep her not just through the storm, but whatever came after. The morning after the storm broke clean and still, the air washed sharp with wet earth and pine. Blythe woke early, drawn by the hush of it, and slipped outside before the children stirred. The porch boards were damp beneath her bare feet, and a yellow-breasted bird sang from the fence post, its call lonesome and bright. Prescott was already in the yard, repairing a length of wire that had sagged in the wind. His shirt clung to the line beside the barn, sleeves flapping like flags. She watched him a long moment before stepping down into the grass. He looked up, the wire cutters pausing mid-air. You sleep all right? Well enough, she said. You? I kept listening for the roof to give, but it held. She walked closer, careful not to tread on the muddy patches where the horses had churned the earth. I've been thinking, you ever consider building something more permanent, a schoolhouse, a proper barn? Maybe even a room with a real door for me. His brows lifted, but his voice stayed even. You planning on staying long enough to use it? I'm not planning on leaving. A gust stirred her skirts, and he set the cutters down slow. You're sure? I wouldn't have said it otherwise. He nodded once, then stepped back to the post. I've got a set of plans I drew up last winter. Thought they'd sit in a drawer forever. Then let's dig the foundation together. By midday, they'd marked the corners with string and stakes, Kira holding the measuring rod while Kent pounded with a scrap of beam. The ground was soft from the rain, and the work went quicker than they expected. Later, Blythe stood outside the lean-to where the tools were kept, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of her hand. Prescott came from the west field, his hat tucked behind his back. You always work like you've got something chasing you, he said. She leaned against the post. I don't know how to sit still when there's something that needs doing. He looked at her, eyes thoughtful. What did you leave behind in Missouri? She hesitated. A father who drank too much, a mother who learned to be quiet. I sent money for a while, but then the letters stopped. He took that in without pressing. You ever think of going back? No, she said. It never felt like mine. He stepped closer. And this does, she nodded. This feels like something I could build with both hands. That night they sat out beneath the stars, the children already asleep, the crickets rasping low in the grass. He handed her a tin cup of coffee, still warm from the fire. I've been meaning to ask, he said. What made you want to teach in the first place? She stared into the dark, the rim of the cup brushing her lip. My youngest sister had a stammer. Children mocked her for it. One day, I stayed behind to teach her letters until she could read them out loud without flinching. I figured if I could help her speak without shame, maybe I could do the same for others. He nodded, the firelight catching the edge of his jaw. You'll do that here if you want to. I want to. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet wood and wild mint. He reached for her hand, his fingers brushing along her palm. She didn't pull away. "You ever think," he said, voice low, "that sometimes the wrong road takes you exactly where you were meant to be?" She turned her face to him. "Only every day since the stage dropped me in this place without a name." He leaned in, not rushed, not unsure, just certain. "Then I'm glad it did." And when she kissed him, it wasn't sudden or startling. It was quiet, like rain on dry soil, like two people who had already begun choosing each other long before they knew it. The first frost came early that year, brushing the tall grass pale and brittle by dawn. Blythe woke beneath a quilt she had patched herself, the seams still rough where she'd stitched by lantern light. Outside, the hills lay quiet beneath a silver hush, and when she stepped into her boots and tied her shawl snug, the ground crunched faintly beneath her soles. In the kitchen, Prescott was already stoking the stove, the children still asleep in the loft above. He nodded to her, then poured the last of the coffee into a tin pot. "You think they'll take to lessons proper?" he asked, voice low under the rattle of firewood. "They'll need structure once snow sets in," she said. "I'll start with hours, routine. Kent's hands can't hold a pencil yet, but he's got a head for numbers. Kira reads ahead when she thinks no one's watching." He leaned back against the counter, arms folded. "They've only ever known this stretch of land. No desks, no bell, no books but the ones you brought. I'll teach them anyway," she said. "And anyone else's children that can make it up the trail come spring." He watched her for a moment. "You ever miss what you left behind?" She drew in a breath, then nodded once. "Yes, but not the place, just the feeling I had before I knew how much could be taken." Prescott didn't speak right away. His gaze dropped to the floorboards, then lifted again. "I've got the lumber ordered. Might arrive before snowfall if the roads don't freeze early." She studied him a moment, then reached for a bowl and began cracking eggs into it, the shells tapping softly against the rim. "Where does it come from?" she asked. "That steadiness in you." He tilted his head. "What do you mean? You don't waver, even when everything around you leans." He paused, then said, "When my father passed, I was 16. The next day I plowed the south field. Ma asked why I didn't wait. I told her if I stopped moving, I'd break clean through. Haven't stopped since." She didn't answer, but something warm and heavy stirred in her chest. By mid-morning, the frost had begun to lift. The sun cut low through the bare branches of the cottonwoods, and Blythe took the children down toward the creek to gather the last of the dry kindling. Kira skipped ahead, a woven basket swinging from her arm while Kent dragged a stick through the dirt, carving slow arcs behind him. As they climbed back toward the house, they passed the post where Prescott had begun laying the first beams for the new room, one that would be hers in time, with walls thick enough to keep out winter and a window that faced east. Later, as she spread out the gathered wood near the shed, she heard hammering from behind the barn. Rounding the corner, she found Prescott bent over a sawhorse, working a plane across a split board. Shavings curled at his boots and his sleeves were rolled high, forearms braced firm. "What are you shaping?" she asked. He looked up, then set the plane aside. "Trim for the doorway. I want it to feel finished, not just nailed together." She stepped closer, brushing her hand along the smooth edge. "You always build like it's going to last." "That's the point, isn't it?" he said. "If we're doing this, it ought to stand through time." The word hung there between them, we solid and unadorned. She didn't look away. "Then let's make it right from the start." That night, after the children were tucked in, Prescott hung his coat by the door and sat beside her near the hearth. The fire was low, casting long shadows across the floor. She was mending a tear in Kira's dress, her needle moving with quiet rhythm. He watched her hands a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about spring." She glanced at him. "What about it?" "About asking the circuit preacher to come through. There's a clearing just past the ridge, soft moss, good light. I thought maybe that would be a good place." She set the needle down slowly, thread still looped between her fingers. "You're asking me to stay for good," she said. "I'm not asking," he said gently. "I'm offering." The fire popped once behind them. She reached for his hand without hesitation, folding her fingers through his like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I've never worn lace," she said. "And I won't promise to be quiet when I ought to speak." "I wouldn't want you to," he said. "I'd rather have the woman who patched a roof in the storm and taught my children how to find their footing." She leaned toward him, her voice low. "Then yes. I'll stand with you in that clearing." Prescott didn't speak. He only bent his head and kissed her hand, slow and sure, like he'd already vowed every word he meant to say. And for the first time since she stepped from that stage in a place with no name, Blythe felt not just chosen but home. The snow came in fits that winter, not heavy, but enough to settle into the seams between the boards and soften the world into quiet. By December, the new room stood finished a single window facing east, wide enough to catch the early light, with a quilt Blythe had pieced together over weeks folded at the foot of a pine-framed bed. She had pressed dried leaves into the corners of the window pane, and Prescott had carved a narrow shelf into the wall where she kept her books and teaching slates. Kira and Kent took to the rhythm of learning by candlelight without protest. Blythe taught from memory, and the few volumes she'd carried west, her voice steady even when the wind clawed at the shutters. The children sat still for her, their attention held not by strictness, but by the quiet certainty of her presence. One morning, as she hung damp linens near the hearth, Prescott came in from the shed, a folded paper in one hand and a faint line between his brows. He set it on the table. "Letter came through the Laramie post. Had them hold it until the trail cleared. Marked from Missouri." Blythe wiped her hands on her apron before touching it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, sharp and slanted. She opened it slow. As she read, her mouth tightened, then eased. "It's from my brother," she said quietly. "He's in Kansas now, says our mother passed last spring. Father left not long after. No one's heard from him since." Prescott didn't speak, just waited. "They sold the farm. My brother found work with a grain mill. He asked if I was all right." She looked up. "I didn't answer the last 2 letters. I was afraid I'd feel the pull again, like I owed something back east." He stepped closer. "Do you?" She shook her head. "I think I just needed to know someone remembered I was real." Prescott reached for her hand. "You're more than real here. You're needed." In the weeks that followed, they prepared the clearing past the ridge for spring. When the snow melted, it would be soft with green again. They marked a place with river stones, and Blythe planted a handful of seeds near the edge, wildflowers she'd saved from a pouch tucked deep in her satchel, carried all the way from Missouri without knowing why. One evening, as the last of the stew simmered over the fire, Kira sat at the table scraping a stub of charcoal across a scrap of paper, tongue between her teeth. Kent leaned against Blythe's side, half asleep. "She's drawing your dress," Prescott said, voice low. Blythe looked over. "The blue one," he nodded. "The one you wore the day you stepped off that stage," she smiled softly. "It's worn thin." "I thought we'd get married in it," he said, "but if it's too frayed—" "I'll patch it," she said. "It's the one I met you in." "That seems right." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a narrow length of twine, coiled tight. "I carved something," he said, placing it in her palm. It was a ring, smoothed from willow wood, warm from his hand. Inside, he'd etched her initials with the point of his knife. "I haven't got silver," he said, "but I wanted to give you something before the preacher comes." She turned it over with her thumb, then slipped it onto her finger. "I've never had anything that fit so well," she said. They were married the following week. The preacher arrived on horseback, coat dusted with trail frost, and read the words with wind pulling at his sleeves. Kira stood holding a basket of petals she'd gathered herself. Kent was barefoot, grinning, face smudged with dirt. There was no grand feast, only stew and cornbread and coffee brewed thick. The neighbors who came brought preserves, a jar of wild honey and a hand-carved ladle. No one stayed late. The wind picked up, and by dusk it was just them again. Prescott took her hand as they crossed the threshold into the house, his touch easy and sure. Kira and Kent had already curled beneath blankets in the loft. Blythe lit the lantern and set it on the table, "I never asked," he said. "Did you ever teach anyone to dance?" She turned toward him. "No. But I know how to follow." He took her hand and moved slow, awkward at first, then steadier as they swayed in the empty room. Her head rested against his shoulder and the fire cast shadows that danced with them. Spring came late but certain. Blythe planted rows of vegetables with Kira at her side. Kent helped Prescott mend a broken axle on the wagon. The schoolhouse, only half built before the snows, rose board by board under Prescott's hands and her design. They painted it white with leftover lime wash, the windows wide and clear. By summer, 3 more children from neighboring homesteads joined Kira and Kent at the table each morning. Blythe taught them all with the same quiet patience, her voice steady as the sun climbing over the ridge. She never wrote back to Missouri. There were no more letters. Every evening, Prescott came in from the fields and found her on the porch, her hands busy with thread or her eyes watching the sky for nothing in particular. They didn't always speak. They didn't have to. One night after the children were asleep and the lantern burned low, she laid her head on his chest and listened to the rhythm of his breath. "I used to be afraid of stillness," she said. "Now I wish time would slow." He kissed the top of her head, fingers brushing her hair back. "We've got years yet," and they did. They grew old on that ranch. The children grew tall and strong, and when the schoolhouse filled, Blythe taught in shifts. Prescott's hair grayed at the temples, and he never stopped building, adding a porch swing, a second coop, shelves for every book she brought home. Together they weathered drought and hail, lean years and bounty. But they never lost what they'd built with their hands and hearts. Not once. And in every corner of that quiet stretch of Wyoming, where the wind still whispered through the grass and the hills rolled on without end, the life they'd made stood firm. Not grand, not loud, but certain and full, and theirs.